Hey everyone, I'm streaming this and then recording it for other platforms because this particular episode of the Matters of Faith podcast, episode 181, is going to cover some ideas that relate to writing and communication and that sort of thing in general. So the podcast is generally just audio, and that's going to go up on Libsyn and all the other platforms that carry podcasts, but this will go to YouTube. It's on Twitch right now if you're watching it live. It would appear. It would appear on Patreon. I'll put it up there before the actual podcast drops tomorrow, as of the time I'm recording this and streaming this, and then I'll use it for promotion in other places too. So generally, the podcast does cover faith. Sometimes we go over Bible stuff. Sometimes, a lot of times, I have interviews with people of various faiths. I've had atheists on as well. We just kind of talk about general philosophy and the influence of religion and where we can find general agreement and that sort of thing. So you'll kind of see behind the scenes of me getting ready to begin the podcast and that sort of thing. If anybody does come on to chat, I may try to acknowledge you, but it's hard to tell where my head will be at that time. But most people will be watching this on other platforms after it's already recorded. So that's where the majority of people are going to be dealing with this. All right, so we'll get ready to begin. Get my microphones where they actually work. Testing, testing. It also help if I turn the microphone on. I'll make sure this one's not on. Yeah, okay. I was recording the corner more than I was recording myself. See, if I wasn't streaming this, no one would know that I messed up. So we're in interesting territory here. All right. Make sure I don't go off screen into my own logo. Okay. You have found the Matters of Faith podcast on Project Entertainment Network with your host, Jay Wilburn. This is episode 181. This one's going to be entitled When the Message is Important. This podcast will be a little bit different topic-wise in the sense that we're going to be talking more about the process of communication as opposed to the content, although we'll go into why content is important for good communication anyway. This is actually being being streamed on Twitch as of the time I'm recording this, so that that visual recording will be available in different places, including YouTube, my Patreon page, and I'll probably promote the podcast other places using the video as well. Before we get into that, I want to remind everyone that there are advertising opportunities here on Project Entertainment Network and with the Matters of Faith podcast. You can contact me directly, or you can contact the Project Entertainment Network website through Armand Rosamalia, and he can get hold of me too. There are many great podcasts on the network, and more are coming. Armand can direct you to the ones that will best serve your audience. And speaking as the host of the Matters of Faith podcast, I would be happy to share your passions with my audience. Podcasting is a great place to advertise because the ads stay evergreen. They're always on the episodes, and people who start listening to a new podcast will drop back and listen to old episodes as well. And so you'll get the initial bump of listeners right at the beginning when your episode with your ad first drops, and then you will see them jump on again later, and you'll continue to get advertising. So especially if your product or service is available online and available around the world, or just broadly, then you're likely to be able to attach a good audience to that ad through podcasting. Thank you, and now we'll get into the rest of the episode. This is the Matters of Faith podcast on Project Entertainment Network with your host, Jay Wilburn. This is episode 181, and we're talking about what you should do when the message is important. Now, this is a little bit of a process episode in the sense that we're focusing a little on delivery versus substance. And so in a way, it may feel like we're a little bit off topic, but I think it's important, whatever you believe faith-wise, politically, or any other way, if these topics are important to you, if they're ones that you're going to be communicating with friends, family, strangers, on social media, in person, then it's pretty important that your mode of communication serve your message the best. So this thing that you believe in deserves a good messenger if you think it's actually that important. So, communication in general. There are two key aspects of communication that many people will struggle with. And one of those aspects is what is said. What are the actual words that are coming out of your mouth, the thing you're communicating, the thing you believe, and the way you're saying it. The next part of it is what is understood. So both of those things are required to be in place for there to be good communication. You'll often hear someone who's bad at communicating say something along the lines of, well, I told them, or I've already said this, or I already explained this to you. And they are caught up on the part of communication that's all them. The idea that I put the words out of my mouth, and the fact that you didn't understand them is your fault, not my fault. That is the sign of a poor communicator. It doesn't mean the message is not important. Doesn't mean they're wrong, but it could mean they're wrong. But the key there is that they do not have a connection to what is understood. So in some cases that means they are not capable of putting themselves in the shoes of the people they're communicating with. And likewise, they can't empathize with how that message is received. They have no concept of how other people are understanding them. So their life is this constant expression of frustration. That may be you, or it may be people that you know that are always complaining that no one understands them. You also probably have friends in your life, or people in your life, they may not even be friends, who every time that you're around them, they are complaining that people don't understand them. And maybe they are a source of miscommunication many, many times. This is the type of person that every time you try to plan something with them, something goes wrong. There's always some aspect of their communication where they say, well, we agreed to this, or we said this, or I know I told you this. And it can be very frustrating for the people who don't feel like they particularly serve these people's needs or wants. And so the fact that they can't get their message across, or they assume that you understand something the way they understand it and become angry when you don't, is not just a problem for them, it's a problem for everybody. So it can be very, 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 very frustrating. So it's important that the messenger take on the responsibility that how the other person understands what they say does matter if they are a messenger. If you're trying to communicate something personal to somebody and they choose not to understand it, well, that's a breakdown in communication on that side. But at the same time, if your goal is to get other people to understand because it's a cause you believe in, it's a tenet of faith for you, it's a political point, it's something that dives into the realm of persuasion for you, where it would be to your benefit, or it would be a goal of yours that others might be persuaded to think the way you think, then it's contingent on you to go ahead and think more about how you're understood, which the only part you can control is the words you actually say and the way you say them. So if you're saying things as clearly as you think you can understand them, but other people are not, then you still have to choose different words. So there is a direct and this is exactly what I mean way of saying things. But if that's not understood, if the second half of the combination that creates true communication is not in place, then your way of saying it doesn't work. So if the way you say something simply makes other people angry, and that's not your goal is to actually represent your beliefs well, then that's not the best way to approach it. If your approach pushes other people away and you're like, well, if they can't handle me the way I am, then that's their problem. Well, that's fine if that's your goal. But if your goal is actually to communicate an idea that you believe in, it probably benefits you more not to push all those people away. If your audience listens to you and never wants to listen to you again, I can't imagine many scenarios where that would be considered successful communication. So what do we do then? What is the way that we go forward? A good message with a bad messenger is a terrible situation. So if the content matters, then a terrible messenger is the worst possible scenario for that message. The message itself becomes tied to the person, it becomes tied to their flaws, it becomes tied to their terrible communication, and it does damage to the message, it does damage to the cause more than it pushes it forward. Don't push the audience away, but also don't bore the audience. It's almost worse to have a boring messenger as opposed to one that is incendiary. Neither is ideal in every situation, or in most situations. But a boring messenger, it can be a real problem. If your goal is to recruit and you make people angry and push them away, then you've done a terrible job. Whether that's your goal or not, the idea of being uninteresting, the idea of being mundane when you're trying to communicate an idea is the worst. People can be hated and still be successful in what they do. Hated politicians can still win. We can probably come up with our own examples of how that works. So it's not a problem to be hated. Hated writers sell books. People who are in the middle of terrible scandals will make money off their products. That's kind of the idea of there's no such thing as bad press, which may not be true, but a book that gets terrible reviews, that has 1 and 2 star reviews, will still sell books. And in some cases, 1 and 2 star reviews sell more books. Because a person will go on and they'll see a bunch of 5-star reviews, everybody kind of praising this book, but they see that all the time and they don't know if that's like the person's family or whatever. But if they'll click on a 5-star review, read it, and be like, okay. They'll click on a 1 or 2 star review, and if the 1 or 2 star review is incendiary or unfair, or it brings up a point that the person considering this book thinks is stupid, then they're more likely to buy that book off that 1 or 2 star review than they are off the 5-star review. Now, from the reviewer's standpoint, who's trying to destroy this book and their goal is that nobody ever reads it, they have communicated badly in the sense that their communication has resulted in the opposite of what their goal was. From the standpoint of the author, a bad review is authors hate bad reviews, but they should welcome them in a sense, because like if a bad review says, oh, this book has too much sex in it or it's too violent, there are a ton of people that are going to buy that based on that review. Oh, this book had so much of that stuff that this person hated it. I would probably hate that person too. I'm going to love this book. I'm going to buy it, and they're even more likely to like the book because they bought it off of someone else's bad review. Even in that sense, that bad review sets the bar a little lower, and so that author comes in and then exceeds that bar, and the reader likes it even more. So bad reviews are very, very useful in a counterintuitive sort of way. Now, at the same time, the kind of review that you would hate to have is one that simply says this book is boring. So, like, worse than a 1 or 2 star review is a 3-star review that just says, it was okay, it didn't really go anywhere, the author did as good a job as they could, but it lost my interest as it went through. I really had high hopes for this and it didn't meet what I was expecting. That review is devastating. That would be the kind of review that would make people never pick up your book again. So I much prefer I hate this book, there's too many cuss words in it, or I don't like this book because it's too violent, or I don't like this book because it has zombies in it and I don't like zombies. Like those kind of reviews, people consider them so unfair, but those are great reviews for marketing, from your standpoint of being able to sell a book. Now, it's not about entertainment. So when I say don't bore the audience, it's not that your goal is always to entertain. When you're talking about important subjects, whether it's um, something you're communicating in a lecture or something that you're communicating from a pulpit, the idea that, oh well, this I need to compete with Netflix and be as entertaining as that, that's not necessarily a good goal, and it can undermine your substance too if you're trying to put on like a dog and pony show for people when there's actually substance there. So it's not all about entertainment, especially when you're dealing with very serious topics. Um, and it's not about making a show out of yourself. This idea of like, well, now it's the Jay Wilburn show, and so I'm communicating this idea that I care about faith right now, but I'll just make this about how great Jay is, and that too can undermine the message. This idea that it's all about how I appear at the end would undermine a message of faith. Now, if my goal is to be all about me, then there's a way that I can make that work too. But presumably that's not what I'm trying to do when I'm talking about faith. Um, but if the substance matters, a bad messenger is a disrespect to the importance of the message. So you want to bring people in. You want them to be listening, not drifting away. So if your presentation is making them drift away, then you can argue, well, this isn't about entertainment, but you can also argue, then what's the point of you speaking if no one is connected to what you're saying? Good oratory, the act of speaking, should blow the doors off the back of the building. Like, it doesn't have to have visuals, it doesn't have to be multimedia, it doesn't have to have props. None of that stuff really matters if the words themselves convey power, whether that's through humor, whether that's through emotional connection, whether that's through outrage, whether that's through performance, whatever it is. The words themselves contain power that would push the message forward in a way that that will connect to people. It's the thing that people will remember. It makes an impression, and you want people to walk away remembering what you said, not numbed to anything that happened just then. Good writing should change people. It should invoke their emotions, which creates stronger memories, as we just discussed. It should stick with them for days. The best compliment I've ever gotten about a story, and the most success I've ever had in publishing, is when either a reader or an editor comes back and says, I couldn't stop thinking about the story. That has power to it. It has power for your brand in the sense of you as a messenger, you as a communicator, you as an artist creating something, have imprinted yourself upon the person in a way that's going to bring them back for more. And it's going to serve your message, your communication, your story, whatever it is, better. Great writing changes the way we think, not always politics, religion, or worldview, although that can happen on rare occasion, especially if a person feels like it's their decision. The key to getting someone to believe something is they have to decide it's their choice. So you can bully a person into believing something if they're vulnerable, if they're young, if they're impressionable. That's how cults work. And a lot of organizations can behave like cults, and groups can influence people. I wouldn't necessarily call it brainwashing, but it's that idea that you're impressionable. You can pretty much manipulate a person into thinking a certain thing. That shouldn't be the goal of any worthy message. But the idea that a person can change the way they think if they believe it's their choice is powerful, and it's one that should be explored more in terms of communication as we go forward in this conversation. So the idea that you're going to change their mind is not as powerful as the idea of they took in information on their own and changed their own mind. You can obviously be a part of that through what you say or what you write, what you create. But again, it has to be the other person coming to some sort of evolution, which usually means that it includes more sources than just you. You're more of a part of an ongoing conversation the person's having with themselves as you go forward. So again, great writing can change the way we think. But it doesn't have to be worldview shifting. A single piece of writing can amend the way we think. It can be an addendum. It can refine their thinking. It can bring a reader to new avenues of thought, which can eventually lead to new conclusions. If your goal is to change the way people think when you write, if your goal is that I want this piece to be important, you're probably going to get up in your own head and have a problem. But there's potential there if you go about it certain ways. It can all be done with words. Every bit of communication we have, not every bit, but the primary modes of communication we have to do with words, whether they're spoken or written. The words can be enhanced through body language, through signals, through facial expressions, through performance. That involves more than just the words, but the words themselves typically communicate ideas that we consider important today. First, there needs to be substance. Substance is important. If the content is good, that helps. Now, I can take mediocre content, weak content, and I can build it into something bigger than itself. But obviously, the strongest work of any kind, no matter who the messenger is if that content is good, if the substance is there, you're building a message around something that matters, something that's worthy. Without that content, you're in a little bit of trouble. Now, you can have great content and take a terrible messenger, and then there might as well be no substance at all. They can do more damage than good as they go forward. Buying in is important, and again, that can include the audience, but I'm talking primarily about the messenger right now. If the messenger believes it. So if you're having to communicate something you don't believe in, or you're trying to finish up a story that doesn't connect with you, you're just trying to get the work done, chances are that is not going to be your best work. So the fact that the messenger buys in is pretty big. Now, that alone is not enough. Everybody who screams on Facebook believes in what they're saying. They may not recognize whether the substance is worthy, and they certainly don't recognize the vulnerabilities in themselves as a messenger and the weakness of their message. But a believer in the message itself is good. But again, that can get in your way if you believe in it so strongly that you can't take a step back from yourself to see how that message is being received and the best way to communicate it, or if you can't take a step back from yourself to be able to hear someone else's point of view and then to be able to connect with them in some way. It's that idea that I believe in this so strongly that I don't have time for you to disagree with me. I don't have time for different ideas. And that can be very, very problematic. Relationship, either real or implied, and I know that sounds a little dirty, but a real or implied relationship between the messenger and the audience can create strength if the messenger cares about the audience. Now, from a written standpoint, whether it's an essay or a book or anything of that nature, then the idea of caring about the audience is that you're putting your best work into communicating with them, whether you're trying to persuade them or not, or whether you're just giving the information and letting them make their own decisions, which I think is a little more powerful approach. Caring about them is in the sense of doing your best work. Caring about them in the sense of a speaker, whether it's a pastor or you're communicating an idea you believe in terms of faith or in terms of politics or whatever else your strong beliefs are. Caring about them means that it's not, the message isn't as important as they are to you. And that's difficult to get to when you believe strongly in a message and the other person's just a potential obstacle in your view, or they're the enemy in your view, and you're communicating with them in a way that like this message is more important than you are. That is not a very effective mode of communication when that's the relationship that's being communicated. So there's a social media problem. So if we look at it this way, if I only care about your welfare insofar as it fits my agenda, then we have a problem. So, like, I care about your health unless you're a certain group of people. I care about your well-being unless you're like one of those people that votes differently than me. Or I care about whether you stay safe or not, but not if that safety gets in the way of what I want or what I believe or the political point that I'm trying to make. So you as a human being, you as an individual are secondary to my principles and beliefs, and therefore your life is secondary to me. And there's no good communication that's going to come on a foundation of your life is secondary to me. Um, there, you can also in social media get to where you're preaching to your own choir. There's no point really. It's just self-aggrandizing, or it's ranting, or it's venting, or it's exaggerating to emphasize your point. Any kind of change that comes from most social media posts that hit religious or political are presented in the form of persuasive argument. So whether they are really persuading or even realize that's what they're trying to do, that's the format they've chosen. So communicating an idea from a standpoint of persuasion, but then only preaching to your own tribe, is sort of pointless. You're going through the motions of persuasion without any substance to persuade. Change requires the reader or the audience to identify. If you're, what I'm about to say is, if the change that you want requires the person reading what you've written to identify as the enemy in order to change, then you're not going to convince them. That's a bad approach. Now, if you believe that, that's fine. But if you believe that and you're still trying to communicate with them, you're just talking to make yourself feel good, and probably your end result is just going to be you being frustrated. So that's an ineffective form of communication, both for the messenger and the audience. Changing that standpoint of where, okay, in order for you to agree with this post and to agree with me, you have to agree that you're a bad guy, which is bad messaging. That can be changed to value the message over yourself, to value the message over your feelings, your political agenda, all of that stuff. If the message matters to you, you can word it in a way that doesn't require someone to identify as an enemy before they can come on board with you. Finding common ground is an effective way to do that. Bringing someone along incrementally can be effective. Showing yourself as a compassionate messenger, where it's not zero sum. They don't have to drop every principle they have in order to come a little closer to your way of thinking. All of that's more effective than the way most people come in with their all or nothing approaches. So some of that can be just an act of a change of angle, a change of approach, your word choice, simple things like that can change the way that your message is received. You can trust the cause, trust yourself, and trust the audience. Those kind of things are fairly important. So trusting the cause, trusting yourself, trusting the audience. If you can do those three things, your communication will be more effective because you're allowing room for change instead of getting in the way of your own message. So trusting the cause. Do you believe it? Do you really believe it? If you really believe what you think is true and what you think is good, then you're not going to communicate it in a way that makes it sound like you getting what you want's bad for somebody else. So again, if your person that you want to be president of the United States is the best person to be president of the United States, then if you say once my guy's president, it's going to be bad for you. Well, now you just admitted that your guy's bad. Now, what you're saying is my belief system and your belief system are in conflict. One of us has to win. I want to win, and I kind of want to rub it in too. But what you're communicating also is you don't actually believe that your person's best. You believe that your person being elected will actually be bad for other people, just good for you, is your thought process. And so you don't truly believe in that person. You believe in yourself, and you don't believe in their person, their guy, their approach, or whatever it is. So a candidate you don't believe in is one that you communicate in, well, he's better than the other person. Or a candidate you don't believe in, you communicate in terms of, well, yeah, I don't agree with all of this, but at least they'll do this, that, or the other thing, or they'll pick the right Supreme Court justices, or something non-principle based that really comes down to, well, at least they're not the other guy. At least they're not the other. This one's me. This one's mine. They're not yours. That's not true belief. The strength. If you truly believe in your cause, you believe your cause has strength to win on its own merits. So even if you said nothing, even if you chose not to be a messenger for this truth that you believe in, it would still win in the end. That's how strongly you believe in it, to where you're not afraid that if you fail, that if you don't defend this with all your might, that it still has the strength to win. You've seen it as the truth, and that's why you support it. So that may be the point. Is it the truth? Deep down, do you really, really believe it's the truth so strongly that you're not afraid that lies can defeat it? That's a difficult place to reach. Secondly, do you believe in yourself? Your words need to be good enough that you don't feel the need to attack, destroy, scorch the earth, or abort the debate. This is where talk show arguments go off the rails. When a person knows they're losing, that's when they go incendiary because you're losing. So when they know that they're losing the point, they'll go to a scorched earth approach where it's not about the debate anymore, it's about shutting the other person down. So that's as close to a win as I can get, so that's what I'm going to do. And most of them go in with that attitude anyway, because they're arguing with someone that's just as deeply planted on the other side of the issue. And so that can go to being accusations, that can go to being attacking the person, that can be implying that you want to kill babies or you're racist or things that could be true. But typically they are brought up in situations where we want to scorch the earth. Well, your beliefs kill people. Your beliefs make you evil. And if you can get to that point to where there's no more room for discussion, then you've saved yourself. You've escaped the debate on issues. And typically, any side of a debate will do that when the messenger feels inadequate, when the messenger does not believe in themselves anymore, as the communication has gone away from the script that they wanted to follow. And then lastly, do you trust the audience to draw its own conclusions that may be different from yours? You better be, because that's kind of going to happen anyway. That idea that a person can read everything you say, sincerely engage it, and in the end, they take it in with their own thoughts, conclusions, worldview, and come to a different set of conclusions than you are. In some cases, they may be closer to right than you are, although that's not something we have to admit for this discussion. But it is true. And so you got to be ready for the fact that people can read everything that you said, understand everything you said, and still come to a different conclusion because they're coming at it with different information, which may be broader than yours, just may be different than yours, or they just come from a different viewpoint and they're never going to come to your way of thinking, but they draw specific conclusions on their own, which could be very different from your own. This is a big one for me in my writing philosophy. To deliver an idea in a novel without explaining it explicitly for the reader, and then to trust that audience to be smart enough to get it. Why preach to smart people like they're dumb? That's kind of my way of thinking. And unless I'm assuming that I'm so much smarter than everybody else, so that everyone who reads or hears me is dumber than me, which is really a dumb way to think, then I don't need to work as if I'm preaching to dumb people. I need to work as if I'm talking to people who are smart enough to get things on their own, and to not feel like I got to preach a point. Do I believe, backing up a little bit, do I believe in my story enough to where I will allow them to explore it on their own and then come to their own conclusions without me just writing these explicit conclusions for them that force them to come to only to my way of thinking and maybe shut down some valid paths that they may be following in their mind as they engage what I'm doing. It's also important to know your audience, know the media, and know yourself. So when I say the medium, who are you talking to? What are the constraints of the method you're talking to? Whether that's, okay, I'm writing a novel, I'm writing a short story, I'm writing a persuasive essay, which is different. I'm writing a social media post, which has serious constraints in terms of communication. I know myself. Like, what am I capable of doing? If I can't talk about this topic without getting upset, then there could be a problem in the way that I approach it, and maybe I'm not the best person to handle it in this situation. So if you can't stop from getting emotional and out of control when you have a discussion, then going on a debate show is probably not best for you. Whereas other forms of communication may work well for you where that sort of passion is able to come forth. I don't particularly like arguing with people. Um, and some of that comes down to the standpoint of like, I don't care if they change their mind or not. In some ways, that can make me a bad messenger. In other ways, it can make me a stronger figure for the things I believe in because I don't act like I lack confidence in them. So it matters a little bit that you do know those things, trust yourself, trust them, and that sort of thing. But looking forward, so let's use a few examples. Obviously, eventually, we're getting to this idea of like conversations that you have with people or sermons, that kind of thing, where you're communicating a faith idea. But looking at it from other perspectives of communication, other medium, other situations, other audiences can help us kind of better understand how to configure our own message for situations that are so plentiful that we'll never list them all here. So for me as an author, looking at readings, there's some general advice that I've taken from other people and have kind of adopted for myself. There are a lot of people who read successfully from novel segments. So when they're doing a reading, they'll read a portion of their novel and then try to convince people to buy the novel that way. That can be effective. Even just this weekend, I've heard some authors reading and from their novels, and I'm like, well, yeah, I got to check that out. Now, of course, that's the mode of thinking for a lot of readings. Generally speaking, though, you're trying to sell yourself more than you're selling the work. So a lot of times the story doesn't need the story. It helps if the story is self-contained, so they can see a beginning, middle, and end to what you're reading, and say, okay, this guy can take me the whole way. Like I trust him to take me from the beginning of the story through an exciting, engaging middle, and then to a satisfying conclusion. So by doing that with the confines of a reading, you're more likely to sell to that particular listener than you are if you kind of give them a piece of a novel that they may or may not be able to engage with. Now, if you are using a novel, you want to take a scene that kind of contains itself, even though you're not going to see the beginning, middle, and end of the novel. At least the scene communicates your ability to carry those portions of the story. You're selling yourself as an author. So when you're doing a reading, it's not so much about I want them to love this story. It's that I want them to um, connect to me as the creator, as the writer. I try to write specifically for reading, so I will go and take a story that I've read, especially if it's self-contained, and especially if it connects to something that I'm trying to sell. But typically I'll write if I know a reading's coming up, I'll write a story specifically for that reading, written with the thought of reading out loud in mind. Because a lot of my writing, sometimes you'll do sentences and word structures and stuff like that that make sense on the page. So a person reading it on the page will get it. They'll see, oh, okay, this section's in italics, so that person's thinking for themselves. And now we're back to the narrative. And so you can do that seamlessly through fonts and formatting and that kind of thing in a book. But it may not communicate perfectly when it's read out loud. So a lot of times I'll write specifically for something that's meant to be read out loud rather than something that works specifically on the page. Practice it. Even if you're not going to memorize it, which again may not be possible with larger works or works that you don't read over and over again at events, but to go to practice it over and over again. I'll have it printed out and be reading it, and when I find myself stumbling on a word, I'll actually underline that word in the reading, and then I'll when I'm reading it again, seeing that underline will let me know, okay, slow down, say this word correctly, then continue on. The audience never knows that there's anything different about that word on my page, but they will see that to them it just sounds seamless, and that's part of that goal. When I'm doing something that I'm memorizing to read, when I underline something, I'm telling myself to emphasize the word. So it's not so much remembering it, it's not so much stumbling over it at that point. It's the idea that, okay, I want the emphasis to be on this word. because if I just run over that word, even if I've said it clearly, it may not communicate to the audience in the rush of sentences to this performance that I'm doing. And so by choosing, okay, I need to underline, I need to emphasize these words in these sentences, that enhances the story, I guess you'd say. Uh, Perfect it for the spoken voice and for your voice. So that means, like, if you find that the wording is awkward coming out of your mouth, then that you change that. If you find that adding something in gives it a little extra punch, or kind of extends the joke a little bit in a way that works, or if cutting some words out and makes it easier to speak, and then you run through it more smoothly, and those are the kind of changes you make on the page. You want to entertain. That can mean being funny, that can mean being poignant, or it can mean some other strong emotion or communication. Don't bore the audience, I would say. Now, interestingly, as I prepared for this, actually last night, as of the point that I'm recording this, 2 nights ago, as of the point that the actual podcast is going out, I won the Gross Out contest for KillerCon, and that's the second year in the row that I've won it. So I won in person at Austin, Texas in 2019, and then with coronavirus on, it was an online event, which was kind of good for me because I had some conventions that were too close together that I didn't think I was going to be able to make, and money and that kind of thing. So it was actually kind of good for me that it was online, but I was allowed to participate again online, and I won the second time. So I've won 2 years in a row. So again, the idea is that this is, telling a gross story that, typically it's funny, but that's not specific to the name. The idea is, the most extreme, gross kind of stories for an audience that likes that kind of thing, and then you get first, second, third. Now, I've won 2 years in a row, and I think I write good stories, so I mean, I'm not going to downplay that on myself. I mean, why would I not be my best promoter on my own podcast? But a lot of it's performance. There's a lot of technique that gives me an edge that allowed me to run away with it those 2 years. So it's not that I'm better than those other authors, because again, even just today, I was sending messages to a couple of them where, like, I was really impressed with their story, and then and again, 2020 is kind of weird because it's all online, and some people, when they do these kind of performances, prefer to be in person so they can get audience reaction. So there were a few people that do really well at these that decided to sit out this time. There were some big names in there too that did a great job. But 2019, there was some real artistry to it. Now the content is rough. It's not the kind of thing that I would want to repeat on this podcast specifically. But within that rough content, there were some authors last year especially that blew me away. The way that they created just artful stories, masterful storytelling in the short period of time that they had, just really blew me out of the park. Even though I won that year, I was vastly impressed by the other authors, and it got me thinking about my own technique, my own storytelling beyond just the contest, like actually writing stories for pay and all that. Just the great work they did. It's amazing what people can do with this. That raises this with what could easily be a base event or art form. In the first year, I talked about my kidney transplant, and I focused on some of the nitty gritty about the treatments and stuff like that early on after transplant. I emphasized the gross parts and the cringeworthy parts, and of course, all of what I said was true that year actually, which added some strength to what I was saying. But I embellished in the sense of I talked up those details in a way that, while true, emphasized the kind of points that would make people really, really cringe, and ways that would make it funny as well. I went with a fiction piece this time, but told it as if it were a true story. As you went through, it became obvious that it was made up. But again, there was some strength in that. John Skip is an extreme horror writer that I really like, in a recent reading that he did for KillerCon this weekend as of the time I'm recording this, he did a similar thing. It was very short pieces. They were based on true events, but then he took it to a different place to make it grosser, make it weirder, make it more extreme. He did a good job with that. Daniel Kraus did a reading from his book The Living Dead, which he took George Romero, who's sort of the godfather of the zombie genre. He had written a partial novel and was in pieces, and this author kind of did a lot of work to get inside George's head, and George Romero's passed away, but he was going to finish the novel by request of George's widow, and so he created a book that's amazing. And when he read from that, part of it was him knowing how to perform the material. It wasn't funny. It wasn't get you. It wasn't like specifically a gross out, but it was masterful prose. And I write a good bit of zombie work, and a good bit of my income comes from zombie books and that sort of thing. But I was blown away. Like, it was the kind of work where it's like, okay, I need to be sure I'm not mailing it in when I write some of these scenes. Like, I need to go a little deeper into this and really bring this scene home. I want to work harder because I've seen this work from people, and that's a way that writing changes people. It can change other communicators and other messengers. But the format of the Gross Out Contest specifically is you got 5 minutes. The first 3 minutes you go, then you're stopped at the 3 minute mark. The audience decides if you get to go on. In recent years, the audiences have been very, very kind, but in past years, they'll be a little tougher. And then you can get 2 more minutes. Both years, I stayed under the 3 minute mark, and I made that choice for a reason. You can do quite well having the audience decide. Having the audience decide to let you keep going is a powerful way to show that maybe you deserve to win. But there's a choice involved with me keeping my pieces under 3 minutes, so that it's never a situation where it's never a situation where there's any risk that I'm going to be cut off. So some of the reason is two goals that I have with that type of audience, like knowing the audience, knowing the medium, knowing yourself, that work together. One is to keep it short. The second is to memorize it. So one of the advantages I've had those 2 years is keeping my piece short and then memorizing my piece, so I'm not reading from the page. There's a cadence that comes from reading, even if you practice it. There are people that can do it really, really well. But in a situation where you're being judged, there's a power behind having it memorized. So knowing that basically you're doing a reading, but you memorize the work, so now you're free to look, you're free to use your facial expressions, you're not bound to the page. You can use your hands, you can create images through your hands, you can manipulate the way that the audience imagines this thing that you're describing, so that they can be drawn in by their own imagination, which is much more powerful than anything that you might actually show them if you do a good job with it. So there's a few reasons I do that. Even if you do a great 4.5 minute performance, you're still interrupted. So no matter how masterful your work is, the flow is interrupted by that stopping point. Now, it's part of the format, so in and of itself, that's not a disqualifier. It's disqualifying if the audience decides not to let you go on. But it's still an interruption. So you're interrupting the audience's connection. They're making these decisions about you. Then you go back into the story. Do you go right back where you left off? Do you back up a few words? Either of those things kind of impacts the story. I work to make it a performance, not a reading. So the fact I'm not reading from the page, I'm actually performing the piece, and that doesn't mean that I'm physically acting out anything particularly, but I'm into it, which again adds to confidence and attitude. So the idea that I'm not reading from the page communicates a level of confidence to the audience that gives you an edge over everybody else. So again, that confidence, communicating attitude, because if you're talking about gross things and you're trying to get that trying to win that audience, and more specifically win the judges, which again, winning the audience is a piece of that. They see how the audience is reacting, and that influences their thinking. There's really nothing in that 2 extra minutes worth having. So again, I loved stories that go over 5 minutes or go closer to the 5 minutes, over the 3 minutes. Some of my favorites from both years are those. But again, there's nothing in that extra 2 minutes that wins it for you over what you did in the first 3 minutes. So it's not like, well, this first 3 minutes is so action-packed that I have to have all this, and then these extra 2 minutes just bring it home. If you haven't won it, if you haven't succeeded in that first 3 minutes, there's nothing in that extra 2 minutes that's going to add anything. There's a lot it can take away. Having that extra 2 minutes can give the audience more time to kind of drift. It can give them time to forget what they loved about the first 3 minutes. Like there's more to lose than to gain, in my opinion. And again, that's just an opinion from the guy who's won 2 years in a row, but still just an opinion. You leave them wanting more instead of wanting it over. So finishing early, finishing before the 3 minute mark, and stopping and having them on board the entire time. If they want more, if they're like, oh wow, that was really great, then that's the perfect time to finish, as opposed to getting a couple seconds past that point per se. Again, this goes back to the confidence and attitude, but by not going to the 3 minutes, you keep it out of the audience's hands. So some of that is like not having them have to decide whether you can continue, which again, if you've done a great job, they should want you to continue, but at the same time, by taking it out of their hands, you gain something instead of giving it over to them. It's the idea of communicating with confidence and attitude that I'm in charge of this room and not you. And that's part of what makes like stand-up comics successful. That's part of what makes really powerful speakers successful. The room doesn't control them, they control the room. They're in charge. Even if someone were to challenge them, no matter how badly that goes, there's still a communication that they're in charge, and the person who's interjecting themselves into the performance doesn't have command of the room. It's that idea of like there's 2 ways that can go. From the audience's standpoint, we decide whether we are done with this reader or not. So if you go to the 3 minutes, that's what's being communicated. Versus he decided when he was done with us. So I think I'm going more for that from the audience. That okay, all these other readers, we decided they could go on, and in some cases maybe, well, I kind of had enough, but I'm just going to be nice to the guy because he seems new, whatever it is. You've still put that thought in their head that they're kind of in charge and they let you do something. When you come in right off the bat, you're fast with that format. You deliver your message with confidence and attitude, and then you tell them you're done instead of letting them get to the 3 minute mark when they're in charge. They're left thinking, wow, we decided about all those other guys. This guy didn't give us a decision at all. He was in charge when he had the stage, and he decided when to hand it back to everybody else. They're going to remember it better, and they didn't drift or forget. So like the key points in your piece from that 3 minutes that really drove it home for them, they're more likely to remember that. It's more likely to stick with them. They're going to be thinking about it while the next guy's talking. That's perfect. That's more likely to happen in that 3 minute span than when you've stopped. Their whole connection to you's broken up, and they're like deciding yay or nay, and then they go back in. It's like you've entered a different piece with them, and they're likely to forget more things from the last one than if you stopped on your own ahead of the 3 minute mark. First person works pretty well for that format, and so on. Now, audience is pretty important too. This may seem a little myopic because we're kind of getting into the weeds about a very specific format, but this is the idea of understanding, okay, is Facebook or Twitter the best medium for me to communicate what I'm communicating? Is there something better I could do with that, and then I save this message for somewhere better, somewhere that I want it communicated more? It can also decide, okay, do I want to be a public speaker? Or do I want to be a person who writes essays? Do I want to write blogs? Do I want to communicate in conversation, person to person? That's knowing yourself. And by understanding the medium, you can decide, okay, here's where I can shine. Here's where I can make this mine and really serve my message and my causes here. Or do I decide a different place and different way to go? Audience, again, sticking with the gross out contest, but you need to know your audience. Like, is this person in any position to receive your message? And if not, is there another way you can speak to them that serves you as a messenger, serves them as a person that you actually care about, but doesn't go down a dead path? Like, if I start evangelizing in this situation the way I would with a friendly audience, this is just going to go badly. So maybe I approach this differently. So with audience dealing with the gross out contest, it's extreme horror. So the challenges of a reading, and specifically the gross out contest reading, which is a little more confined than just a reading, the confines of that are similar to the challenges of writing an extreme horror piece, a splatterpunk piece. It's for an audience that wants the most extreme examples of this grossness or this violence or this extreme form of storytelling, let's say. So that's your audience, whether you're writing the pieces or whether you're doing a reading at an extreme horror event or in this gross out contest, which is literally a contest. It's not just you reading trying to win over the audience, it's you reading trying to win. Or put out there that you're a person worthy of winning. So they have read a lot of this stuff. They've been exposed to a lot of it. The stuff that I do for these contests, a person that's not into extreme horror would be shocked, probably. But the audience, some of them still are, but the audience is more likely to find it amusing than they are to be shocked. So, from that standpoint, if you try to shock an audience that's prepared to be shocked, that's a tough sell in some cases. That material still needs to be in there because that's the format. That's what they expect. They're going to be upset if you get up there and start talking about something literary. But then instead of leaning into the horror, which needs to still be there, there's an advantage in leaning into the humor, which needs to be there too. But that's the part that they're still open to. That's the part that they're not, jaded probably isn't the right word, but the part they're not necessarily conditioned for. People have heard funny things all the time, but it doesn't change the fact that you can still hear something funny and appreciate it. If you've heard the same shocking piece of a story over and over and over again, it loses some of its shock value. So humor has some advantages that shock doesn't with an audience that's prepared to be shocked. An audience that's prepared to laugh, that's a good thing. That actually works to your advantage in using humor. An audience that is prepared to be shocked, that works to your disadvantage because they're braced against it. They're not open to it. They want it, but they're not open to it in the sense of like, oh, I came here to laugh. When I came here to be shocked, I'm more likely to be disappointed by this person's attempt to shock me, because I've heard this before. It's the same as the last two stories, as opposed to like, oh, I can't wait. So again, leaning into the humor gives you some advantages that can serve you with that audience that's prepared to be shocked. You can catch them off guard in this humor realm in a way that will help bring this other piece in that might not work by itself. You got to practice to get it down to the core, the strongest sentences. So if you're doing that 3-minute limit and you want to come in below it, you can't have an elaborate opening. You can spend a little time on it, like as in 1, 2, 3 sentences setting up your story, but that opening has to be either shocking or humorous. So it needs to be funny, it needs to draw them in, it needs to throw them off guard, but you got to be right into it. You can't spend your first minute establishing a scene for something like this. Whereas for a novel, that medium is better for that. Although there's a lesson to be learned about getting right into the action in a way that engages the audience without them being like, I don't understand what's going on. But by practicing to get it down, it's that same thing with another reading, that idea that like, Okay, I can take out the words that don't work. I can make these sentences run smoother. This is a little awkward. What's the core of this that matters? If I can't find any of it, let me just cut this and emphasize the next sentence more. Let me make sure to keep this sentence because without it, there's something missing from the piece, that kind of thing as you go forward. So those are some of the successful strategies that I've used personally for that format. And by working myself in that format and other types of writing and other types of communication, the way I'm speaking from notes here for the podcast, but speaking from my own head as we go off the notes. All of these things build up my form of communication. So the way that I operate as a messenger benefits in all these areas by the fact that I'm practicing in different places. But then when I get down to a specific thing, whether it's the gross out contest, whether it's writing this novel, whether it's communicating something that matters in this podcast, maybe something, a topic more controversial than just the things we're talking about today, that those tools are at my disposal, but then I need to think, okay, who's the audience, what are my strengths, and then what's the best way to communicate for this particular medium. So if we got into like sermons or conversations, now if you're communicating your faith, your worldview, that kind of thing, you need to think about in terms of like, okay, what's the best use of my time here? What is the strongest ways to communicate this, get my thoughts across, and then punch that idea home in a way that sums up this theme and keeps it in their head, that leads me into the next thing I'm talking about, that leads me to a strong conclusion, that leaves people thinking about this thing. With a conversation, it's a little bit different, okay? I go into a gross out contest wanting to win. I go into a persuasive format, whether it's sermon, essay, or what have you. I go in to win. I go in to persuade. Now, if you're engaged in a conversation, if you go into a conversation to persuade, then you've entered a debate, and that's a little bit different. Not that that's not important, but you're likely to be disappointed in most debate conversation formats. If I go into a conversation to win, like it's not even about the person anymore. I've communicated that they're secondary to my goals in talking to them at all. They are. They might as well not even be there. Anybody could be substituted for them because I could have the same conversation with anyone, have the same argument with anyone, and it would be the same. And you run into people who, when they talk to you, it's like they're bringing you into an argument that they're already having. So you haven't talked to them about this topic at all, but you communicate an idea, and they come at you with all their talking points like they've been arguing with you about this for a while. Because again, it's not about you. You're not even a person to them, really. You're a stand-in. They've argued with 5, 6, 7 different people, and to them, you're just like all those people. You're a blank slate put in there for the sake of arguing with. And no one wants to have a conversation with that. That's the person that you block online because there's no value in having that friendship anymore. So in communication, we need to think differently about all these formats, but especially conversation. If you have causes that matter to you and you're going to discuss them in a conversation, that kind of thing, it's a good idea not to go into a conversation trying to win. It's a good idea not going into a conversation trying to scorch the earth if you feel like you're losing. There's a lot of disadvantage to that. It's good to go into a conversation with the idea of relationship involved. It's good to go into a conversation with the notion that the audience matters, that you trust them to be their own human being, and as long as they're not coming after you in a way that makes you need to disengage with them, that their thoughts, their feelings, their humanity has value to you. That is going to be much more productive. It's going to make you much happier than if you treat a conversation as if it's a gross out contest, where you need to win, you need to shock, you need to be the best. Each of these formats are different, and the idea is if your message matters, if your form of communication has meaning to you, there's importance to it, then you need to treat it with respect. And sometimes respect means care, and sometimes respect means practice, and sometimes respect means letting things go, in the sense of like, this person's humanity is more important than me winning this argument. I can win this argument and lose the person. I can win this argument and lose the friendship. And sometimes that's not worth it. A lot of times that shouldn't be the primary goal of engaging another human being, and it does more disservice to your message and to your causes than it helps. Winning, even if you win, quote unquote, that conversation in your own head, you may have gained nothing. Winning the world but losing your soul, as the Bible says. So thank you for listening in. I hope this has been helpful, and I hope you can find ways to apply it to your own life, and I look forward to talking to you again next week. Okay, and we're out. I appreciate everybody who's been watching in on this, and I look forward to seeing you guys either on Twitch, on Patreon, on my YouTube page, on social media, or any of the places that you engage me. And hopefully you don't feel like that I don't respect you, or that I don't take you, or that I take you for granted, or any of those kind of things. Hopefully my communication is as positive, as productive, as worthwhile for your time as I hope it is. So again, thank you guys for being a part of this extra little recording for my podcast. Thank you very much.